Hello, Neha, and hello to everyone listening. Apologies, it's been a wee while since our last podcast. Neha and I both seems to have some form of the plague. If you could hear us discussing before this podcast, it was basically The Exorcist going on. But we will try to avoid any disgusting noises during this podcast. But if any leak out, then our apologies. The AI editing tool has failed us. How are you today, Neha?
A lot better than I was for the last 10 days being sick. So I'm just glad we can kind of resume this. It's been a while. So it's good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too. So yeah, do you want to talk about our topic today?
Yeah. So Sid Shunker gave us a question in our repo. So we've got a repo, you can file issues. And so we got a really like a plethora of questions, and they kind of all revolve around EMs and directors and how they can collaborate with product and design folks. So this is like about going beyond engineering and how we collaborate better and like what it looks like when it's good and when it's not. And so I was thinking about how to start, and originally I was like, oh, what does good look like? But no one cares about what good looks like, right? Let's talk about the bad stuff. So I think we should talk about like what healthy tension looks like with product and design. So I'm curious to see here what your thoughts are first.
Yeah, so like I guess my take, like a lot of things, is that the when people have an idea of, I don't know what you would call it, toxic positivity, or like, oh, if we're all just sufficiently aligned, then we'll all agree all the time. Like to me, that kind of misrepresents the likely relationship between engineering and product and design. And in some ways, like, there's the old stereotype about like sales and engineers, right? And I think that's a more healthy, maybe extreme example to look at, where essentially what makes a salesperson's life really easy is to just promise the customer whatever you need to make the deal happen, and then sign the deal, and then go to engineering and be like, hey, here's all the stuff you have to build, right? And engineering hates that. But also, like, what makes engineering life easy and sales life hard is for engineers to just say, hey, we've decided the roadmap for the next 5 years. It doesn't matter the size of the sale or the customer. We're not building anything that we don't already think is a good idea. Sorry, like, right. And I think almost like acknowledging the stereotype is helpful, even if it's not true, because it represents that like probably engineering are going to pull in that direction, probably sales are going to pull in that direction, and that you have to have some sort of healthy, constructive disagreement and meet in the middle, right? And it's less the case, I think, but with like engineering and product and design, there's often the same sort of healthy tension, right? Like engineering are often thinking about things like tech debt. How can the code be smooth? How can we all be like developing things faster and better? And how can I have a really elegant solution that like the code is beautiful and everyone weeps with joy when they sees it? Like product are, again, best case scenario, products are thinking directly from the user's perspective and like, well, if this has to be kind of a bit kludgy or require a lot of code or not paying down tech debt, as long as the user gets what they want, then it's great. And then design, again, depending on what your designer's background are, that could be anything from, as long as it works great for the user and their experience is great, or I guess not naming any companies, but there's been companies who've been criticized recently for as long as it looks really pretty in like marketing copy, like there might even be printed marketing copy, then great. It doesn't matter if it's like a unusable mess that's buggy and whatever, right? So I guess that's the extreme version of each
Yeah.
position, right?
Yeah.
But like where's the reality? Where's like what do you actually see happening day to day now on this stuff?
I think I want to break it down also because it becomes a lot easier if you think about the tension of the different personas that we're trying to optimize for. So you mentioned two of them. Well, actually, you mentioned all three indirectly. So one is the user, and like the user is the easiest one to think about, right? And so, the user kind of makes the request. We do like, usability testing and stuff. And so that kind of comes back into our backlog. And, a user does feast with their eyes first. So it does need to look good, right? To a certain extent, but then it also needs to work. So that's like the first one. And that would be great if we just did what the user wanted, but like we also still have to like stay afloat as a business and we have to make money. And that is the business. So the business is persona number two. And that's like what you were saying around like customer needs and like what actually drives revenue. And like a lot of times that comes in from sales. The third persona that like I remember when I worked at Pivotal, I was working with someone named Eric, and he was helping me realize that the third persona is the technology, right? Um, when if you really had to split it between like design, product, and engineering, which is like not how you're supposed to do it. But if you had to, and everyone was backed into a corner and they had to rep one persona, design would represent the user, product would represent the business, and then engineering would represent the technology. And I do not believe in siloed roles, but I do believe in making sure that all three of those personas are represented in a conversation. So I remember when I was working with like a startup that was trying to build their MVP. And they were like, okay, cool. So, like, we're going to have it so that you can type any question in and then it's going to like give a response. And I'm like, okay, well, you need to map that on the other side, especially since we don't have AI technology. This was like literally 10 years ago. Um, you know, and so it'd probably be easier if you already know what the mappings are to use like a drop down. And they're like, no, 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 I don't want to use a drop down. I want to use like radio buttons, or maybe it was vice versa or something. You're like, that's literally the same thing on the underside, right? Like, I literally, that's how you map it. And like how you choose to display it, it doesn't matter. And that's like an engineering perspective, right? You're thinking about the technology, you're thinking about how it's going to grow. And then you're trying to make sure that when you're building it, it's going to build in a way that's going to grow with the business. So you need to be curious about the business. You need to be curious about what the user needs are. And then you have to figure out how to like build this weird machine in a way that's like extensible. The other part is that, like, just like you said, Mike, if any one of those sides representing the user, the business, or the technology goes too wild, you fall over, right? Like, we've seen it so many times. Well, I mean, like, obviously, as engineers, we have like our chips on our shoulder, and we're like, okay, well, we've seen it so many times where people are like, I don't care, just build it, right? And you're like, I can build it. Like, I can build it. Now, it's going to fall over afterwards. If you exceed this many users, if you try to optimize for this many things, then it doesn't work anymore because we have to like architect it differently and it takes longer. And we're always just talking about like cost and cycle, or like scope and time to build, right? And you have to have that healthy tension, right? Because as an engineer, I've over optimized for wanting to represent the technology. And I need someone to argue back and be like, no, we still like have a business to run. And you're like, but I want to do this refactor right now. And they're like, can it wait like 2 weeks? And eventually you should come with up with some sort of compromise. So tension, good. Arguments, good. But like any one side going too crazy or not being able to resolve those arguments, and then that causing a delay in starting to build something bad, right? And so I feel like that's kind of like what I think around tension. And I feel like the biggest telltale phrase that like drives me nuts is like when someone asks us, right, as engineers, can't you just XYZ? And then actually to like come down on the engineering side, our instinct at this point, because we've had this conversation so many times and we haven't seen it resolve well, is we just say no. And like, you can't just say no. No is like not a rich conversation. That's not a way to resolve tension. And like, we need to be better about like saying no. And like, Mike, you and I have had this conversation before. So like, what can you say instead of no, right? If someone's like, can't you just, right? And how do you have that conversation?
Yeah, I remember we talked about this when we started working together, and I think it's obviously come up a few times on this podcast that I'm like very good at saying no, but people don't like to hear it. And also, like, I think the important thing is it may be because you're saying no because you have assumed that like all of these things are the case, or you're like based on the current program roadmap or whatever it may be. So yeah, I
These
guess
assumptions are in your head, right?
exactly.
Yeah.
So like getting them out there, like even if the no is there, it's no, but because A, B, C, D, whatever. Right. But also sometimes, I guess you coach me on this of saying like, well, we could do this if we did this, or when we do this, or unless we do this, or whatever. Right. So like right now, kind of, I'm the person who maybe owns the roadmap the most at the organization I'm at, and product and engineering reporting to me. And like generally the way I have those conversations now is like, okay, like we have for our roadmap items, we have customers attached, ARR attached, date attached, right? Like the dates, the ordering, everything like that is flexible. But if you're saying, okay, we need this for a 1K ARR customer, right? And it needs to happen tomorrow and it's going to take a month, and that's delaying work that we need in a couple of weeks for like a 300K like ARR customer, then it's like it makes it very easy once you almost can just spell it out. And it's kind of obvious to anyone in the conversation, like why you would do one thing and not the other or whatever, right? So I think that's part of it, is just like getting more information out there and discussing it. I also think sometimes it's the power dynamics involved are interesting, because like I think I remember saying a lot, various previous jobs is to engineers, is when they were like, well, the product manager told me to do that. And I'd say, well, okay, you look in the org chart between you and the CEO and tell me where the product engineer is in there. They're not, right? So that means that they are not your boss. They do not get to tell you what to do. It means that they are a peer who you are collaborating with, right? And even if they're quite a lot more senior in the product organization than you are in the engineering organization, that's fine. Like, bring it to a more senior engineering leader, and it's their job to kind of help you figure that stuff out. And I think, that can go in both directions, right? Where you sometimes can get a bit of learned helplessness from product or engineering or design, right? Where they're just like, well, this side owns this persona or tech debt or whatever, and I can't possibly make them do what they don't want to do, so I'm not going to try, right?
Yeah.
Whereas it works way better if you can just be like, okay, I'm going to state some assumptions, I'm going to try and make some convincing arguments. I might even kind of escalate, or to use a dirty word, play politics or whatever, to try and get us some movement or navigation on this, right? Because again, ideally, there is going to be that healthy tension. But if one side just completely capitulates, then you're actually not doing the best thing probably by the business or the customer or whatever. If you're not, if either you're 100% advocating for them without enough information, or 0% advocating for them because, like, engineering holds all the keys or whatever it may be.
Yeah. I mean, like, I get this. The form that it comes to me as is like product or engineering. And I keep on saying product. I think like design, I'm kind of like including in the umbrella a little bit. Honestly, like we don't I have not experienced a lot of tension between engineering and design historically. So usually it's between product and engineering, hence us using them so much as the example. Um I usually get it as product saying engineering is being unreasonable. They're saying no to everything and they're saying that's impossible and they're not giving me anything to work with. Or vice versa, engineering is saying product is not listening to me. I'm saying no. And like they say, build it anyway. And so, as a leader, just like you said, Mike, right? Like they need to bring it to someone. That's us, the managers. And so, like, first, I have to verify, like, okay, is what engineering is saying, is it true? Is it actually impossible to do what they need to do? And then I need to look at the levers, right? The levers are always scope, time, and staffing and quality, right? So it's like, what can we compromise on? And like, my job is to figure out how to quantify that or phrase that in a way that would get product to consider if it's true, if the claim is true. Sometimes engineering is padding the numbers. Sometimes engineering is just like not revealing an assumption that needs to be like brought to surface. And sometimes engineering has a quality level that they're like, well, the last time we did this, we had 200 customers on board immediately and it fell over. I'm going to say no, right? And you're like, okay, cool. Well, I'm going to go work with product and say, let's only roll on 10 customers in the first 2 months, and then we can roll on another 100, right? And so then we can grow with the product, right? And you're trying to just like stage things in a way that would work in like a logical progression so that like engineering building time matches like what the demand is. And so my job is to figure out what the levers are. And just like as you said, the words are if, when, unless, right? These are the conditional words that you use. And then you try to see what like product would be willing to accept. And ultimately, um, a lot of time our job is to go back to engineering and say, I know you hate this. This is where we've landed as a decision. And they're like, "But we're building it wrong," right? And you're like, "Well," and I think, I don't know if Derek will like me calling him out, but he uses this phrase, "That's what the money is for." And I've kind of like adapted that and saying like, "We'll pay you to build it wrong, and then we'll pay you to build it right," right? So it's like either way, like ultimately the decision is not in your hands. You've given input into a decision. And now your job is, given the decision that's come, without compromising your work hours and without compromising like what you're responsible for because you report to engineering on the org chart, like build it to the best that you can. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, right? Like one of the phrases at Pivotal was like, the goal is to build it quickly, right? So it's like, well, if you're going to do it right, build it quickly, but also like sometimes it's better to just go and do it wrong as quickly as possible and then get the results and then be able to talk about those results and do something about it afterwards. So I think that like knowing what your levers are, which are scope, time, staffing, which is like the biggest one that I feel like is generally negotiable, to be like, we could build it faster if we got this engineer, or we could build it faster if like we increase headcount by a little bit, even just temporarily for 2 weeks, or we reduce and then we go back and then we go back up, and then finally quality, right? And even quality can be like fewer customers at a time, right? Let's like do a beta and then let's do an alpha, right? And that's where I've seen like the most leeway where product is like, okay, cool. I don't like it, but we can announce it as a wait list and we can delay by 1 week to let people off the wait list. And let's just like communicate it that way. And it's all about that, like that back and forth and helping them understand the why and making sure it's fucking believable. Because if you don't do your own research and you don't actually understand what the numbers are, you're going to look real stupid when you like just take engineering at their word. And then later you find out that actually it was fine after all of that argument. So, yeah. And then you want to
Well,
do it as quickly as possible.
I think the part of like taking people at their word or whatever is like all of the best product people, design people, engineering people, and this might be most controversial for engineering people, are like at least a bit multifaceted, right? Like for
Yeah.
me, the best of all of those people could, you know, push come to shove, do at least one, if not maybe two of the other roles to some degree if they had to, right? Because, you know, I think to go back to the design example, I guess I feel like a design engineering dispute, which isn't super common now, but like particularly when back in the era of when, or in some organizations where designers worked primarily in like Photoshop instead of Figma, right? And it was like, okay, this UI needs to look exactly pixel perfect how the
Yeah.
Photoshop looks, right? And then, you know, you would sometimes get engineers like carving up images and embedding them because that's the only way they could get it to make it look the same, right? Like that was the type of thing where I feel like it's, you know, we've moved past that a little bit, right? But like, I think the other thing with being multifaceted is, you know, that word, I always get like a little bit triggered when an engineer says something is impossible. Cause unless you're talking about like building a perpetual motion machine, right? Or
Yeah.
solving,
Time
you know,
travel. Yeah.
an NP problem, whatever. Yeah, exactly. Like there are some examples, but it's like most of the time, most of the stuff you're going to be asked to do in a software company is not impossible. It might be, as you say, impossible given team size, constraints, roadmap, whatever you want to call it, right? But if you say that, it's your, you know, I haven't read it, but there's like a famous kind of negotiation book that I've heard widely recommended called like Getting to Yes, right? And it should be that
Hmm.
idea of like, how can we get to a yes here? If I assume that that person is not an idiot and they're not asking this for a completely stupid reason, right? Then like, let's figure out how we can get them what they want, right? And the other part of this sometimes is like with engineers, like you don't need to get permission for every single little thing, right? So if, you know, I guess I might have mentioned this before on the podcast, but like I had a boss in the past, CEO of a consultants company, and he had a great attitude where he was like, here, and this was like, you know, early C++ days, well, not early C++, but like, you know, earlier C++ days. So like automated testing wasn't quite so massively widespread as it might be now. But his view was like, we write automated tests here, right? And you do not need the customer's permission to write an automated test. And if the customer tells you to rush something out the door, like he was like, I literally gave you permission to lie to the customer and tell them they are not going to do tests because they perceive that as going to be quicker, and then just write the tests anyway, because actually we're here to do what's best for the customer and not
Hmm.
here to just do what the customer tells us, right? And I think there's a similar attitude with like engineering and product and design, whatever, sometimes where like it may be the product manager is like, no, just build this in a hacky, filthy way, accumulate. We don't have time to pay down tech debt. We don't have time
You're
to
like,
write tests,
okay,
whatever. Like again, a
sure.
good product manager who's worked as an engineer or maybe even has, you know, done a bit of coding in the past will know that that's a bad idea. I probably won't say that, but it might be that it might even be that they just don't acknowledge all the tech debt. And then the engineer reads that as, oh, therefore I can't fix the tech debt. It's like, well, actually, you probably can go and improve things as you go along, right? And there's often a happy middle ground on this stuff. And, you know, I'm sure you and I have also both worked with engineers where if you let them do whatever they wanted, they would just spend the next 5 years paying down tech debt in a way that to the customer seems to have made absolutely no difference.
No, no
But
visible
under the hood,
output.
all the engineers who would look at it would be like, oh my goodness, this is so everything's so
gorgeous
beautiful
code.
here. It's like beautiful code, gorgeous.
Gets rewritten the next year.
Exactly. Like gorgeous code for 5 minutes and then it becomes legacy and everyone hates it again. But like, I think that's the important part of this stuff is it's like, look, you know, if you go and if you're told to just work on a feature and you spend 99% of your time working on tech debt, okay, like you're going to get busted and you should get busted because like that's not really fair or respectful to your coworkers. But if you're like, okay, I want a new feature in the reports like feature or whatever, right? We need new functionality there. If you go in there and the code's a complete dumpster fire, then it's like, by all means, make it a little bit better as you go along, as you build a new feature, right? And no one is going to slap you on the wrists for that. But
No,
like, at
especially
the
if
same,
like I think that I love the term prefactor. So there's like a refactor that's at the end, right? That like usually doesn't go over very well. You build the thing and then you like clean it up after. And then like that those 2 weeks that you had reserved to like clean it up, that always gets cut off because you have to move on to the next thing. But if you do the prefactor, which is like, okay, I'm going into this area in order to make this area of code more usable, we need to prefactor a little bit and like clean it up so it's like easy to build and then kind of like put those in as you go along. I feel like no one's going to argue with like one or two tickets of like pre-factor code as you build it out, right? And like that's your job as an engineer is to be slick with it, right? Like your job is to take care of the code and your job is to deliver that value, right? Like you're the executor. So you got to figure out how you're going to get that done in a way that like stays under the radar. And like stays under the radar sounds sneaky, but like stays under the radar is a threshold. So you're just trying not to trigger the threshold, which is like we're not building stuff for our customers and we're not like building value for the company. You mentioned earlier a little bit about like how every like when you've worked with really good designers and really good product managers, they've been like multifaceted. And I was like curious if you could kind of like paint a picture of like some of the best product managers or designers that you've worked with who were multifaceted and what that looks like.
yeah, I think it varies because I think the multi it has to be almost like multifaceted and it has to be a level of humility there as well. Like I think maybe more product managers, but like product managers who are very recently ex engineers, particularly if they were very senior engineers, and essentially sometimes say, rarely say, but often like it comes across sometimes when they're saying like, look, if you just let me build this, it would just be easier because I can do this better than you, right? Like that never builds trust or respect or whatever, right? But at the same time, I think, particularly with all the AI tooling we have today, I would question a product manager or designer in a software as a service company who had literally never written a line of code in their life, right? Like
Yeah.
even
Indirectly, you can now. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Like, I mean, even product managers I know who would describe themselves as like non-technical or whatever, right? Like, I don't think I know any of those who would feel like they could never literally write a line of code ever, right? Or say like, if there's some HTML, like, and there's a typo, like go in there and
Yeah.
submit a pull request to
Yeah.
edit that, right? So like, I think there's a sort of minimum standard there beyond which it's like, look, like what you said earlier, right? Is you need to be able to basically call people's bullshit sometimes, right? When someone says something that's impossible and you need to have enough knowledge to be like, look, we both know it's not actually impossible here, right?
Yeah.
Like we both know that we could do this. Like I don't know. I sometimes think as well about, I don't know if anyone saw there's like the infamous Krazam video on YouTube talking about microservices. And then he just, yeah, I'll need to link this to you afterwards, Neha. I'll try and stick it in the show notes or whatever. Basically just like an engineer explaining to a product manager why they can't build something due to microservices. And then, in the end, he breaks down and he's like, product manager, you stupid little product manager, you know nothing of my pain. And there's like, I feel like it's something product managers and engineers can both enjoy because I feel like most of the time they've been on one or both sides of that conversation. And I think that's the thing. It's like, yeah, you need to, even that little line, like, you know nothing of my pain, right? It helps if both sides know something of the other side's pain. And again,
Yeah.
in the best product management, like relationships, again, like maybe a spicy take for a podcast like this, but I can't do it. Like if you're a product manager who's literally never talked to any customers ever, right? You're probably not very good at your job, right? And I think that's one of the things about, if you just see it as like, I divinely know what is better and I will tell the engineer what to do. And the engineer could probably figure it out themselves, but I just have better taste than them. Like you're probably pretty crap at being a product manager. Whereas if you're able to say to the engineers, it's like, hey, look, I spent 20 hours last week talking to customers on Zoom calls, painstakingly write down everything that they like and don't like about given features. Like, do you want to do that? And my experience is most engineers are like, hell no. And it's like, well, cool. Like, we each have our roles and we can figure out this stuff and, whatever. And same deal with designers, right? Like when a good engineer is working with a great designer, right? Like then generally the designer is like, hey, look, I can make this software really easy to use and I can make it look really nice. And I can tell you, like, again, with the state of Figma and stuff like that, like often I can just like literally tell you the components to use and the places to do it and, some of the CSS to copy and paste and whatever it may be. Like, and you can have this thing that you built that looks amazing and is really easy to use and whatever, right? Do you want that? And again, most engineers are like, hell yeah. Like that's a problem that I don't care passionately about that I've been able to have solved for me.
Yeah.
And I think like that's when this stuff works the best, right? When you've got mutual respect, but also a certain amount of like a big part of that person's job, which they're good at, is something I really don't want to do, right?
Yeah,
Again,
I mean, like, I feel like this is where we need to put some respect on their name, right? Like, a product manager probably has to interface with leadership. They have to, like, get all of the incoming requests, and believe me, like, as someone who's sometimes had to step in for product managers, it's messages from the CEO and the CTO and the CPO of all of these new ideas or, like, the latest tweets about the project, right? And then it's the users and the user, usability tests and the user interviews. And it's like also from sales and all of these things saying, like, why can't I do this? Do you understand that now that this has been delayed by 2 weeks, that like we might lose this deal? I don't want to have those conversations. Well, I do now. Like, once you get to a VP level, like, you kind of don't get to be fully protected from all of these conversations. Do I want to have these conversations? Absolutely not. Right. They are doing that for you. That's like a hired role. And so, of course, they have a lot of attention. And when they're coming to you and they're saying, like, hey, is there anything you can do here? Of course, our reaction is going to be that we're annoyed and we're like, no, I told you no twice. But you have to understand that they're taking care of a bunch of stuff that you never want to do. And same thing with designers, right? They've got a design system that they're like trying to stay in accordance with. They're trying to coordinate across the board. They want to make sure that the experience is consistent across the board. And they have a lot of considerations and experience in things that we've never done before. So our job is to represent the engineering side and the technology, and then those conversations come together, right? So I feel like it works really well when we respect each other's side and when we can kind of like pinch hit for each other, um, and understand that at the end of the day, as long as we can make sure that uh, our team knows what's going on, that they can do their best work every single day, that they're like not burning out, right? In terms of like business needs, and that like people have like clarity around what's possible. Like, we live another day and we keep moving forward.
yeah, I think that's it. I think you summed it up pretty well there. Well, yeah, thanks for the question, Sid. It's been nice being able to have a more or less a whole session on this. And yeah, I feel like we've got a reasonable understanding of what the good and the bad look like for this. But yeah, so thanks everyone for listening. And we'll be with you again, hopefully a little bit sooner next time, assuming we're not plagued.
Yeah, probably in the new year, but yeah, we'll see you then.
Yep. Have a great time, everyone. Bye.
Bye.